Okay, we're on Kilayim, Perek Chet Mishnah Hey. Looks like a short Mishnah, doesn't it? This is going to be one of, I think, the longer Mishnah that we learn, if only because the Mishnah raises a number of fascinating issues that I hope to share with you. I hope I don't go too long, and I hope you find this interesting as well, because it's fascinating to me. So in the previous Mishnah, we talked about, that different animals that were born from different species, right, it all goes by the mother. You remember this chart, a little bit wacky, right, but it all goes by the mother. So this Mishnah is going to be also a similar continuation and classification of different types of animals vis-a-vis different halachot. So it's relevant it seems to be relevant for Kilayim, and we're going to see it's relevant for other issues as well. It's going to be relevant for other issues as well, which come upon as soon enough. Says the Mishnah, Haprotiyut asurot, v'haramach mutar. Okay, let's just translate. We'll go for this one with the Bartunura, protiyut. He says, are min pradot, some kind of mule donkey, she'en adam yachol la'amod aleihem, ulevarer ayedei simanim, eza mehem imo chamor, ve'ezem imo sus. So it's a certain kind of species, remember some of them, we had a hinny that was born from a mother of a donkey and a horse, and then you have a horse and a donkey, so there were certain kind of animals that the Mishnah said, this thing called the protiyot, according to the Bartunura, where you couldn't tell if the mother was the horse or the mother was the chamor. Okay? So that's what he says. So therefore, since you couldn't tell, remember we always said in the last Mishnah that the species follows the mother. If you don't know if one of them, his mother was a horse, and one of them was a chamor, was a donkey, then they're not the same species, and therefore you can't mix them together. It's asur min kilayim. The haramach, mutar. Ramach, what's a ramach? It's some kind of animal. Let's go for English in a second, okay? Mules of an uncertain parentage are forbidden with one another. Let me see if I can move this over so that you can get the whole thing. I'll just make it smaller so you get the whole thing. Okay? But a ramak, a mule whose dam is known to have been a mare. Okay? A ramak is mutar. Let's go back to the Mishnah. Protiyot asurot, v'haramach mutar. Okay? That's what the Bartunura says. What's a ramach? Shekula min echad, v'imam sus, they're all one species, and the mother is a horse. Ulebelashon Aravi, in Arabic, in the Susya, Nekeva, a female horse, Ramach. V'domelo b'nei haramachim. I just want to quote you. What's that from? You might recognize it. It sounds familiar. It sounds from, that's right, you learned it in Megillah Esther. When they send their letters out, Vayichto b'shem HaMelech HaChashverosh, this is the end in Perek Chet. When they're sending their letters, Vayichto b'tabat HaMelech, Vayishlach svarim b'yad haratzim, basusim rochvei harechesh, with horses. Ha'ashtaranim b'nei haramachim. There's a whole literature what this ashtaranim are, but the children of ramachim. Ramachim are some kind of animal. Okay, that's enough of that. That's the simple explanation of protiyot and ramach. Now we get to something fascinating. Adnei asadeh chaya. Adnei asadeh is a chaya. I'm going to read the rest of this Mishnah, and then I have to come back to Adnei asadeh, because it's so interesting. Rabbi Yehuda, I hope I'm not building this up too much. Rabbi Yossi Omer mitamot be'ohel ke'adam. So the Tanakama, Rabbi Meir says that Adnei asadeh is a chaya. Rabbi Yossi says it's mitamot be'ohel ke'adam. I'm going to read you the Kahati because it totally ignores this issue. Okay? Well, he doesn't really ignore it. I'll read you. I'll quote it to you. I'll skip and we'll come back. Hakupad v'chuldat hasinaim chaya. Back to the translation because let's see what it means. Okay? The hedgehog and the mole of the bushes belong to the category of chaya. Remember, there are different categories of animals. Some are chayot, some are behema. Let's say if a person says, I swear that I'm going to buy a chaya. So you can buy one of these things because we have to know whether it's a chaya or a behema. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Beit Shammai Omri, Beit Shammai says, Mitamei kizayit b'masa, uchadasha b'maga. Okay? So this chuldat hasnaim, so kupad was either a porcupine, we said it was. Some say we said it was a hedgehog. Okay? It's a chaya. So Tanakama says it's a chaya. The chuldat hasnaim, so this second animal, the chuldat hasnaim, Rabbi Yossi says in the name of Beit Shammai, it's mitamei kazait b'masa, v'cha'adasha b'maga. So in order to understand this, I made a little chart. Okay? In order to understand this, we have to understand some of the laws of Tuma and Tahara. Okay? The halacha is that the nevelat behema uchaya. If you have a dead chaya, if you touch it, or you carry it, or you lift it. So let's say I'm holding it. I'm holding a bucket under which I'm carrying a bucket in which is a dead chaya, the nevela of a chaya. So then it's metameh, either or. If I touch it, and how much does it have to be? A kezayit. But if I have a sheretz is a rodent. If it's sheretz, it's metameh only b'maga, but you don't have to have a kezayit's worth of sheretz. You only need ke'adasha, like a lentil, a tiny amount, and it's metameh b'maga. If I touch a tiny amount of a dead sheretz. So now we understand. Rabbi Yossi said, Beit Shammai said, metameh kezayit b'masa. It's metameh b'masa kezayit like a chaya. But it's also ke'adasha b'maga. It's also metameh ke'adasha b'maga like a sheretz. So therefore, let's go back to our Mishnah. Chudat hasnaim, if it's a chudat hasnaim, it's a chaya. So one of the halachic ramifications is if you touch a dead chaya, if you don't know it's a chaya, if it's not the size of a kezayit, if it's less than a kezayit, then you're not tameh. It's not metameh. But Rabbi Yossi said in the Beit Shammai, I don't know whether it's a chaya or it's a sheretz. So therefore they were machmir. They said b'masa kezayit, as if it's a chaya, and b'maga ke'adasha, as if it's a sheretz. That's the explanation of the Mishnah. All of these categorizations of protiyot and ramach and adnei hasadeh as a chaya. Okay, and Rabbi Yossi said, let's go back to adnei hasadeh because it's fascinating. What is this adnei hasadeh? So I'm going to read you the Bartanura, and I hope you don't fall off your chair. It says the Bartanura, adnei hasadeh, chaya gedola b'sadot. It's an animal, a beast that grows in the fields. Ukmin chevel gadol yotzei min haaretz, shegdela bo ota chaya. And there's a sort of like a giant rope growing from the ground that it grows with it. It's called the chaya. Ushma yadua. Its name is known. I don't know if it means his name is known or it's called the yadua. Okay, it sounds like it's called the yadua, but hu yidoni akatu b'Torah. This is when it says shoel ov v'yidoni. That's a kind of necromancy. It's a kind of speaking to the dead, involving the bone of this yadua, this animal who grows in the fields and has a chevel gadol connected to it. I'm just going to the Gemara. This is not being made up by the Bartanura. This is all based on the Yerushalmi. If you do an internet search for adnei hasadeh, okay, which I did, of course, because this is really, really fascinating, you come up with the following: adnei hasadeh. In the Mishnah, it says adnei hasadeh. Okay, the Rambam explains it's a baal chai domeh la'adam. Okay, it's a baal chai similar to the adam. Don't get fooled by this monkey. Ombrim balei sipurim, the people in the stories say, shehu medaber habei dvarim ve'eno shotek. It speaks a lot, it's ever quiet. V'dibru domeh la'adam. That's one explanation of adnei hasadeh. But if you go to the Mikropedia Talmudit, for those of you who are interested, Encyclopedia Talmudit is now putting out. They figured out that people aren't buying their books. I was at a fair and I saw they had a stand. So they've decided that they're gonna make this thing called the Mikropedia Talmudit. And in this Mikropedia, okay, in Talmudit, it's like shorter. Okay? The Gemara says the following. Let's see if we can find, one second. It's based on the Yerushalmi. I'm going to read you the Yerushalmi because the Yerushalmi says something very, very quickly. Okay? He says, Baal zeh, the Yerushalmi, here it is. Bar nash detura. Baal chai zeh mechai mituburo. This Yerushalmi says. This is an animal that lives from his navel, from his belly button. V'im nifsak tiburo eno yachol achiyot. And if you cut off the belly button, if you cut off his umbilical cord to the ground, he dies immediately. This is the adnei hasadeh. If you look in the Wikipedia has a similar entrance. There's a Hebrew Wikipedia, which you can look up more or less basically anything. And they have a similar reference. I think they quote the Gemara directly. Here we go. Okay. He says exactly this. It's a yitzur mythologi, a methodological figure. Says the Gemara, Yerushalmi says, Bar nash detur hu chaya min tibure, ifsek tibure lo chaya. That's the translation in the Aramaic. So what is this adnei hasadeh? This is what the Bartanura is directly quoting. This is not only on a computer. You can look it up on your own Mishnah. He's directly quoting this idea of adnei hasadeh, the Bartanura, from the Yerushalmi. Okay? Bitsurato, mechubar b'tiburo b'oto chevel yotzei min haaretz. It's connected by its belly button to this rope in the ground. Bitsurato tzurat adam b'tzafu partzuf yadayim b'raglayim. And its shape is the shape of a person with a face and hands and feet. And kol ber yerushay lekarev elav. Don't get close to it. Because it kills anything that comes close to it. When you want to trap it, right? That you shoot its arrows at its rope, at its umbilical cord. And he cries out with a bitter cry, umiyad met, and he dies right away. This is the Avnei Sadeh brought down in the Mishnah. So of course we're going to think to ourselves, what in the world is going on here? Now if you want to know, if you look it up, I found online, this is like a well-known creature. Yes, I know we think we're talking about Harry Potter, okay? But this is something that clearly they believed in. Okay? You can do a lot of research on this, and it's a very interesting question. But you see here, he quotes this idea. I found a book of creatures, and it's also referred to in Rabbi Slifkin's book, Mysterious Creatures. Although I think he was a little gentle, Rabbi Slifkin. Very fascinating. Okay? This is Adnei Sadeh, some drawing of the Adnei Sadeh. Somehow it only appears that the location is Eretz Yisrael. The name was used by Rabbi Meir Baromitz. Okay, he calls it here we go. He calls it a Yedua. Rabbi Meir called it a Yedua, but here we see the reference to Adnei Sadeh, or Adnei Sadeh, or Abnei Sadeh. Okay? This name was used by Rabbi Meir, these creatures of Yidoni that we saw in the Bartanura, often translated to wizards. The exact pronunciation is debatable, etc., etc., etc. His size is not known, etc., etc., etc. So now, what do we even do with this idea? If the umbilicus is cut or uprooted with the Yeshua dies, what do we even do with this? I'm running out of time. What do we even do with this? I'm going to give you a brief description. There's an article that was written by none other than Rabbi Dr. Sidney Lyman about this issue. I'm going to make it a little smaller so you can see it. Okay? I don't know where exactly this was from, but it's from Torah and the Mara. Let's move this over so you can see the whole thing. In the 19th century by Rabbi Dr. Sid Lyman. And in the end, he quotes Rav Hirsch. Rav Hirsch says, the question is, how, this is an ongoing, obviously well-known debate for which Rabbi Slifkin is very known. He's a rationalist. Do we have to believe that there's a thing called an Adnei Sadeh simply because the Adnei Sadeh appears in the Mishnah? So Rav Hirsch writes, he says, it doesn't mean, it's not a criticism of Chazal if this Adnei Sadeh it appears in the Mishnah. Because we have to assume that they were discussing, they never saw Adnei Sadeh, but the people of the time spoke about these creatures as if they were real. And people swore left and right that they were real. So Rav Hirsch writes, let me make it bigger so you could read it. Rav Hirsch writes the following. He's writing a letter, okay? This is a letter, let me move this out of the way. This is a letter that he wrote to Rabbi Heil Wessler. And with this I'll just read the relevant paragraph, and then the Idach Zil Gemor, there's much, much more to talk about, but that's enough. Imagine, for instance, a man like Humboldt living in their age. A man like Humboldt, he was a famous explorer in Rav Hirsch's time. He would set out on his journeys and report from a distant land that there existed creatures with a human shape but growing from the ground. That's Adnei Sadeh. Or that there existed mice produced from the soil, and that mice, half earth, half animal, and similar creatures were still extant. These creatures still existed. That's a Mishnah. This is another example that appears in the Mishnah in Chulin. And that the existence of such creatures was widely held to be true and factual. Would we not expect the sages to discuss the status of these creatures from a Torah viewpoint and clarify their status in respect to the forbidden and the permitted, cleanliness and uncleanliness, even without their setting out to verify the existence of these creatures? Because we know today that such creatures were but fantasy, can we hold the sages responsible for tales accepted as factual by all men of science in their age? If you look, he says, people understood, people believed in this thing called Adnei Sadeh. Chazal never saw Adnei Sadeh, but it doesn't matter because Chazal, when they said, there's something called Adnei Sadeh, what is it? Is it a man or not? Is it a chaya or a person? So the Tanna Kama says, Adnei Sadeh that they never saw was a chaya. Rabbi Yossi Omer, metamei od be'ol ke'adam. It's metamei be'ol like a person. This Adnei Sadeh, if he's a real person, I don't care if he's attached to the ground. It's not an animal, it's a person. It has a halacha category. It didn't need to exist to have halacha categories. It could be in the realm of the theoretical as well. I've gone way, way too long, but as you can see, this is so, so interesting to me. We'll stop here. If you have comments, I'd love to hear your comments on this issue. It's like it's a Pandora's box the Chazal opened, but once I started the Bartanura, I had to go into it much deeper. I have to share with you, almost forgot. I have 30 seconds left. If you look in Rabbi Safrai's book, he says that the proteot, based on the Adnei Sadeh Liran, he says the proteot is nothing other than a Pegasus. That's what he says. I'll make this smaller so you can see. Okay, oops, you can't even see it. He says it's a Pegasus, it's a flying horse. And that was based on, if you look over here, I can't show you, but he says, in his own opinion, he says that's based on some Greek word that I can't read Greek. We'll stop here. If you have any comments or questions, artspolter@gmail.com. I'd love to hear your opinion if you made it this far. Have a great day.